Hey everyone, thanks for stopping by. Today I want to talk about all the different ways that you can use distress inks. Now, distress inks have been on the market for several years now, and there's a reason for this. They are amazing. There are so many different ways that you can use them, and it's really just up to your imagination how you can use them. But in this video, I'm going to share several techniques with you that I love to incorporate on my card designs. These are all very simple and you need minimal supplies, and you really get a great effect with these techniques. Anybody can do these, and they're really great. So let's go ahead and get started. The first technique is just a simple blended background using a ink blending tool. I use an ink blending tool by Ranger, and it's just as simple as it sounds. You're just blending the ink onto your paper. So for this technique, I am going to use some colors of distress ink. I chose 2 purples and a blue, and I'm going to use my Ranger mini ink blending tool to apply the distress ink to the paper. I have a piece of laminated paper underneath my cardstock panel right now, and I do that because it protects my work surface, and it just provides a smooth surface to blend on. When you do ink blending like this, you want to start off of your cardstock or the paper that you're using. So I like to ink up my blending foam, and then I kind of dab it off onto that piece of laminated paper, and then I just do circular motions onto my cardstock, and I try to use as light of a touch as I can, but you can see that in this demonstration I started off a little too heavy-handed, and but I eventually fixed it in the end. But just remember to use a light touch when you're doing this until you get the hang of it. It's always easier to add more color later than it is to take it away. For my last color, I chose a teal color. I believe this is Mermaid Lagoon, and this is a really great teal color that I like to use with purple. And again, I'm just going to start off of my paper and then work in circular motions onto my cardstock. Now I'm going to take a polka dot stencil. This is by Heidi Swap, and I'm going to pounce on the same colors of distress ink that I used on my background. I'm starting in the middle with the wilted violet, and then I will move to the shaded lilac, and then I will finish with the Mermaid Lagoon. And like I said, I'm just going to ink up my blending tool and then pounce on the color. The next technique that I love to do is to add water droplets to my distress ink. So for this card panel, I just did a simple ink blended background with 5 different colors of distress ink to create like a rainbow pattern. I also have a spray bottle of water. You can just use a paintbrush and water, but what I like to do is just remove the lid of my spray bottle, and then I just tap on water onto my card panel, and then I take a paper towel, like a dry paper towel, and I just place that on top of the water droplets, and I press down, and then I lift up, and that water has removed that ink, and it gives you a really nice, fun background. The next technique is just taking that laminated piece of paper, or you can use a craft mat or any non-porous slick surface, and you're just going to smush down your distress ink pad, and you're going to spray some water on the ink, and then you're going to place a piece of watercolor paper on top of that ink and just get like a very natural watercolor background. For my first card panel, I used orange, pink, and purple distress ink. I just smushed them down randomly on my craft mat, or my laminated piece of paper, but you could use your craft mat, of course. And then I just took my spray bottle of tap water, sprayed it on there, and then I took my watercolor paper. I used Canson XL watercolor paper, and I just smushed it on there until I got kind of like the pattern that I wanted. I did the same thing for the next two panels. I just used different colors, and this is really easy. It can be a little bit frustrating if you're just doing it. I got kind of frustrated with this purple one because it wasn't doing what I wanted it to do, but just make sure that you play around with it so that you can find your happy medium of ink to water. I added a little bit too much water to this purple one, so I didn't get the effect that I wanted, but you just have to play around with this. The next technique is called Emboss Resist, and it's when you do heat embossing on your card panel before you apply your distress. I have a piece of 80-pound Solar White Nina cardstock, and I have a stamp set by Avery L, and I'm going to apply Versamark ink to my stamp and then stamp it down and then apply clear embossing powder and then heat set it. To stamp down my image, I am using my Hampton Art Stamp Perfect stamp positioning tool. I have a review on this. I will link the video down below if you're interested in seeing the review. I really love this. It's a great alternative to the Misty. I stamped down my image with Versamark ink, and now I'm going to apply some clear embossing powder. You could use any color embossing powder that you want. I usually just use clear because it's out on my table, and then I'm going to heat set it. And all I'm going to do now is use some Mowed Lawn Distress ink and then my Ranger Mini Ink Blending tool, and I'm going to just do some simple ink blending over the top of that embossed image. The effect that you get using this technique solely depends on how much ink you add while you're blending. I added more ink to the one end just to show you that you can see the embossing better if you use. Many people don't know this, but you can get really great solid stamping results if you do this simple little trick using a Versamark ink pad with your distress ink. What I'm doing here is stamping down my image just using the distress ink, and you're going to see how splotchy and uneven this stamps. Even by stamping it a second time, I'm still not getting the result that I want. Now I'm just going to add the second layer to that flower to try to hide the blotchiness of the base layer, and I'm still not going to get the impression that I need to get to make this flower look good. Now I'm going to use the Versamark ink on my stamp. So I kind of messed up this time, but all you have to do is apply your Versamark ink to your stamp and do not wipe it off. I wiped it off and I shouldn't have done that. So you apply your Versamark ink and then you immediately apply the distress ink to your stamp and then you stamp down. When I did it a second time, I put the Versamark ink down first and then I immediately applied the distress ink and I got a much better result. This is one of those tricks that just saves time, and you can save so much money by not buying a lot of dye inks. You can just use your distress inks to get great stamping results. Now we are going to just stamp down with our distress ink and then use a paintbrush with water and also a spray bottle to move that ink around to create a watercolor look. I'm simply just stamping down my image with just a shade of distress ink. There's nothing else on my stamp, and I'm going to just stamp it down onto some watercolor paper, and then I'm going to go in with a paintbrush with water and move the paint or the ink around. And then you can also take a spray bottle with just tap water and do one spray, and then that will kind of like move the ink around, and then you can just go over it with the paintbrush to kind of help the ink go where you want it to go. Now I'm just going to use my distress inks and use them as watercolors to color in this really pretty floral image. I have a piece of watercolor cardstock. This is Canson XL watercolor paper, and I'm going to use a stamp set by Concord and Ninth. This is the Hello Lovely stamp set. I'm going to use that floral image, and I'm going to stamp that in VersaFine black onyx ink. I applied some anti-static powder tool to my watercolor paper before I stamped down my image, and then I'm going to ink it up with my VersaFine ink, and then I'm going to stamp down. Since I'm using watercolor paper, I had to stamp this a few times, but using the stamp positioner, it makes it really easy. After I stamp this down, I am immediately going to apply clear embossing powder, and then I will heat set that. I have some different colors of distress ink that I'm going to use to color in my image, and I'm going to smush these colors down onto my laminated piece of paper, and I'm going to use that as a palette, and then I'm going to apply the colors with my my water brush. And before I start, I'm going to give each thing of color a spritz of water, just because I didn't have a lot of water in my water brush. For my smaller flowers, I put a drop of water on each of like the little petals, and then I dropped the distress ink into that water, just so that it would spread out and look a little bit more natural. The leaves were really simple. I started with my darker green color, which was Mowed Lawn, and I put that on the bottom of the leaves, and then I took Twisted Citron and I put that on the ends of the leaves and some of the smaller leaves. Now I'm taking a really light blue color, and I'm just going to use this as a little bit of a shadow around my floral image. Did you know that you can heat emboss with just distress ink? Well, you can. All I'm going to do is use a stamp, and instead of using Versamark ink, I am just going to use distress ink to stamp down my image and then to apply clear embossing powder. You can use distress ink in place of pigment ink if you need to emboss something in a different color, and maybe you don't have the color of embossing powder that you need. This is a great way to do that. Distress ink stays wet for a long time, so you're going to have that ability to stamp your image and then in your distress ink, and then apply your clear embossing powder over the top. I used the Versamark method with my distress ink on one of the images, and then I just used distress ink on the other, just to show you that you can get a really good impression using both techniques. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it gave you some ideas on how to use your distress inks. Or if you don't own any distress inks, I hope this gives you some advice on how you could use distress inks if you plan on purchasing them. I am a big advocate of distress inks. I think they're awesome, they're inexpensive, and you can really go a long way with just a few primary colors. You can blend them and you can get so many uses out of just a few distress inks. So thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and comment and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.